Waitress comforts a young soldier having a panic attack. The next day, AF-22 Raptor jet lands just for her, and so does love. The sky shattered open with a thunderous roar that sent coffee cups clinking and silverware jumping on tabletops. Every head in the small diner jerked toward the window as the tremble beneath their feet grew more violent, more immediate. The sound did not come from a storm or a train or any earthly thing the town of Eldridge was used to. It came from the heavens. Behind the diner, the golden wheat field that stretched for acres shook as if alive, and then, like a mythical beast descending from the clouds, a jet sliced through the sky with lethal grace, sleek silent for only a moment, then roaring again as it lowered, impossibly, defiantly, toward the field. A collective gasp rippled through the town as people poured out from storefronts and sidewalks, shielding their eyes from the sun. Phones lifted, jaws dropped. The lettering was unmistakable, F-22 Raptor. It touched the earth with a precision and control that seemed unreal, the jet's turbines sighing to silence as the dust settled and the field quivered in its wake. The hatch at the top hissed open. From the cockpit, a figure rose. He climbed down the ladder slowly, not in ceremony but with purpose. Tall, striking, clad in a jet-black flight suit with silver trim catching the light, helmet tucked under one arm. His boots crunched softly against the earth as he stepped onto the field. Grace stood frozen just beyond the diner's back door, her apron still tied at her waist, a coffee pot cooling behind her on the counter. Her heart had stopped at the first sound. It had yet to resume. He saw her immediately, and he walked, not toward the crowd, not toward the cameras or stunned officers or local reporters already arriving in waves, straight toward her. People made way, parted like the sea. All eyes followed him, this phantom from the sky, but he saw only her. When he reached her, the world went quiet. No one breathed. And then he knelt, right there in the soft earth, surrounded by wheat and whispers, in the same field where the warbird had landed. He looked up at her, his eyes locked into hers like gravity itself had no greater pull. From his suit, he pulled a small black box. He opened it. Inside, a simple ring, gold, clean, classic. His voice did not shake. "You once gave me a reason to live. Will you let me give you a life to live for?" Someone in the crowd gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." But Grace could not hear them. Her eyes blurred with tears, her lips parted in disbelief, her hands shaking. She stared at the man she had not seen in months, who had once walked into her diner, broken and afraid, and now knelt before her with fire behind him and hope in his hands. Her knees buckled. She did not speak. She only cried. The sound of 100 heartbeats seemed to merge into one stillness, and in that stillness, Grace finally stepped forward and whispered, barely audible but infinitely certain, "How did we get here?" 1 year earlier, the diner hummed with a kind of energy only Friday nights could bring. Plates clattered, conversations overlapped, forks scraped against ceramic, and the jukebox by the door played a country ballad no one really heard. Grace wove her way through the tables like a practiced dancer, balancing a tray of onion rings in one hand and a pot of coffee in the other. Her smile was automatic but kind. She knew most faces. She knew who liked extra ketchup and who hated ice in their soda. The bell above the front door jingled, barely audible over the din. He walked in alone, young, tall, broad shoulders under a military jacket. He kept his eyes down, walked fast, chose the booth in the far back corner where the shadows were thickest. Grace noticed him immediately, but she did not stare. She had seen that posture before, stiff but uncertain, like someone always ready to run. He sat with his back to the wall, eyes scanning every angle of the room, hands gripping the edge of the table too tight. She poured coffee for a couple near the window and turned just as the crash came. A plate slipped from a busboy's tray and exploded on the floor. The sound was sharp, violent, louder than it should have been. And he came undone. In a second, the soldier in the corner lurched from his seat, arms flailing as he knocked over the table. Silverware hit the ground, coffee cups shattered, people screamed. He dropped to the floor, curling against the wall, hands over his ears, breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. "No, no, no!" His voice cracked with terror, too loud, too raw. The diner froze in horror. Then chaos broke loose. Chairs scraped back, patrons stumbled over each other trying to get away. Someone yelled, "Is he armed?" A woman grabbed her child and ducked. The cook peeked out from the kitchen, eyes wide with panic, but Grace moved. She didn't think. She just dropped the tray, coffee splashing across the tile, and pushed through the circle of frozen fear around him. She dropped to her knees right beside him. He was shaking violently now, rocking against the wall, eyes wild, mouth open but saying nothing anymore. Grace didn't touch him yet. She crouched low, her voice steady and soft. "You're not there," she said, not loudly. "You're here, in a diner, with me." He didn't look at her. She placed one hand slowly, gently on his chest, right over his pounding heart. "Do you feel this?" she asked. "That's real. You're not in a war zone. You're in Eldridge, Friday night. Smells like burgers. Listen to me." Still nothing. She shifted closer, leaning in, speaking low and rhythmic, like a lullaby. "Breathe with me. Just one breath. In, 1, 2, out, 1, 2. His breathing was erratic, his shoulders jerking, but her words cut through the noise. "In, 1, 2, out, 1, 2. A minute passed. 2. And then something shifted. His eyes flicked toward her. Just a second, but it was enough. She kept going, guiding his breath with her own. Another moment passed. His shoulders relaxed. His hands dropped from his ears. "In, 1, 2. He inhaled, roughly, shakily. "Out, 1, 2. He followed. She smiled, but kept the tears in. "That's it. You're here." The diner had gone eerily quiet. No one spoke. Everyone just stared. Grace stayed with him, breathing in sync, hands still resting gently over his heart. Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally his eyes lifted, fully meeting hers for the first time. They were wide and wet and filled with something between shame and disbelief. A single tear slipped down his cheek. She didn't wipe it. She didn't move. "You're safe," she whispered. He nodded just once, a trembling nod like it was the only thing holding him together. She sat beside him, her legs starting to cramp, but she did not leave, not until the shaking stopped, not until he pulled his knees down, not until he exhaled like someone coming up from underwater. He looked at her again, lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came, and that was okay. Grace offered a faint smile, her voice soft now. "Do you want water?" He gave another small nod. She stood slowly, not breaking eye contact, and walked to the counter, ignoring the stares. By the time she returned with the glass, he was gone. Just the upturned chair, a scattered napkin, and a room full of stunned silence. He had disappeared without a name, without a word, but he had left something behind, something only she had heard. That scream was not madness, it was memory, and she had stayed. She had knelt and breathed and waited. 3 seconds. That was all it took to change the course of 2 lives. And though she did not know his name then, she would remember his eyes for the rest of her life. The morning after the incident, the diner was quiet, still holding its breath from the night before. Grace walked in early as usual, ready to open up before the breakfast rush. But as she moved behind the counter to wipe down the bar, she noticed something unusual. An envelope. It lay neatly at the edge of the counter, unmarked but clearly left with purpose. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands, and opened it carefully. Inside was a small metallic insignia, a United States Air Force badge, and a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly, expecting maybe a bill someone forgot to pay. Instead, there were just 6 words. "You didn't run. That saved me." Below it, etched into the badge, Luke Hart. Grace stood still, staring at the name. She hadn't known it the night before, hadn't asked, hadn't needed to, but now it felt etched into her chest, heavy and permanent. He had come back, not to speak, not to eat, just to leave this. That evening, as twilight spilled across the sky and the diner lights flickered on, he returned, same jacket, same posture, same quiet presence. He slipped into the farthest booth again, the one in the corner where the shadows softened the light and no one looked twice. He didn't order anything, just sat, hands folded, gaze drifting to Grace when she wasn't looking, and then he left. The next night the same, then the next, until one night when she was cleaning tables after close, she found something left behind. A folded napkin. On it, drawn in delicate pencil lines, was a sketch of the diner's interior. The booths, the counter, the coffee pot. Her, in motion, her ponytail trailing behind her like a ribbon of movement. At the bottom he'd written, "You reminded me I'm human." Her breath caught. She pinned the drawing to the corkboard by the register without a word, and the next night he returned again. More sketches followed. A slice of pie, the corner jukebox, a steaming cup of coffee, and in each a small note written in the same careful hand. "You see what no one else does. You don't flinch. That matters. I look forward to 7:00 p.m. They never spoke, not out loud, but the silence between them said more than most conversations. She began to notice things about him, how he tapped his thumb 3 times before sitting down, how his eyes always scanned the exits, how he never stayed more than 45 minutes, but he always left something behind. And in return, she began to leave little things for him too. A glass of water at his table, a slice of pie with a note, no charge, a fresh napkin folded neatly, placed at the edge of the table, waiting for the next drawing. This quiet ritual, night after night, turned into a rhythm only the two of them understood. She never asked where he went after he left. He never asked why she always wore long sleeves, even in the summer. They didn't need to. The words were in the pencil marks, in the crumbs she wiped from his table with a gentler touch, in the way he always looked back one last time before walking out. Something unspoken was building, something fragile but real. And though they were still strangers in the eyes of the world, Grace knew deep down this wasn't coincidence. This was the start of something neither of them had dared hope for. Rain fell steadily outside, drumming against the diner's windows like a gentle, steady heartbeat. The kind of rain that softened the world, blurred the streetlights, and slowed time down just enough to let pain surface without warning. The streets beyond the glass shimmered with reflections of red and gold neon, water pooling in the cracks of the sidewalk like small glistening mirrors. Cars passed occasionally, tires hissing over wet pavement, but the world inside remained still. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing their coffee, shoulders hunched against the quiet. The hum of an old radio played blues, low in the background, crooning something about lost chances and long roads. The smell of fresh pie lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of rain on pavement, and everything felt hushed, like the whole place had agreed to speak only in whispers tonight. Grace stood behind the counter, drying glasses with a dish towel worn thin at the edges. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, her hair tucked behind her ears, and there was a soft crease between her brows, the kind that came from thinking too hard and feeling too much. The warmth of the diner clashed gently with the cold pressing through the windows, making her breath rise in faint clouds whenever she passed near the drafty door. The bell above that door jingled softly. She looked up. Luke stepped in, his silhouette framed by the mist outside. He was soaked from head to toe, his jacket clinging to his broad frame, boots leaving dark prints on the linoleum. His hair was matted, his cap in one hand, the other clenched at his side, but he was calm, almost too calm, like someone who had walked through a war just to ask a question. He didn't go to his usual booth in the corner, not this time. Instead, he walked slowly, deliberately, until he reached the bar. He sat down on one of the stools across from her, resting his cap on the counter like it weighed as much as his memories. Grace froze mid-swipe. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, nothing else existed. No rain, no radio, no quiet hum of kitchen machinery, just two people staring at each other across a chasm of unspoken truths. There were no drawings left behind this time, no napkin notes, no silent exits. He was here for something else. Then Luke spoke. His voice was low, rough around the edges, like it had traveled through sandstorms and smoke to get to her. "Do you believe someone like me can feel safe again?" The question didn't fall. It landed. Heavy, sharp, raw. His eyes held no defenses, no military steel, just something unguarded and ancient, pain that didn't know how to disguise itself anymore. The kind of pain that didn't scream, just sat quietly and asked to be seen. Grace's fingers loosened their grip on the glass. She folded the towel slowly, set it aside, and walked around the counter. Her footsteps were soft against the tile, but each one echoed inside her chest like a drumbeat. When she reached the bar stool beside him, she slid onto it without a word. She didn't speak at first. She just sat with him, the way someone might sit beside a gravestone or an open fire, aware of the heat, aware of the loss. "I don't know about war," she said finally, her voice low and steady. "I've only known what it takes from the people it leaves behind." Luke turned his head slightly, his gaze still fixed on her. There was something searching in his expression, something like surprise, as if he hadn't expected understanding or softness. "My dad was in the Navy," Grace continued. "He left when I was 10. It wasn't a bullet or an explosion. It was a heart attack on deployment. But when they told us, it felt like he'd been shot." She stared at her hands, turning them over like they might still carry the weight of that phone call. "I spent years hating uniforms," she admitted. "Not because I didn't respect them, but because I knew what they meant, what they could take away. I hated the medals, the folded flags. I hated how quiet my house got after he left." Luke said nothing, but his body shifted, a small release in his shoulders, a crack in the armor. "I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes," Grace said, "to fly over a battlefield, to lose someone mid-air, but I do know what it's like to be scared of silence, to feel abandoned, and I know what it means to stay." She reached out slowly, without force or fear, and laid her hand gently over his. He didn't react at first. His hand was cold, still, almost rigid. Then, after a beat, he turned his palm and let his fingers curl into hers. "I don't know how to be normal," he said softly. Grace smiled, sad but warm. "Good," she whispered. "Normal's overrated." A breath left his lungs in something like laughter. It was short, broken, but real. She held his hand tighter, grounding him. "You're not broken, Luke," she said. "You're just carrying too much alone." He glanced at her again, eyes darker than the storm outside. "And you?" he asked. "What are you carrying?" She looked at him a long moment, then replied with quiet certainty. "Enough to know that staying is harder than leaving." Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, two wounded hearts sat side by side, hands clasped, stories unraveling without words, and something fragile blooming in the silence. That night, there was no thunder, but still lightning struck. The morning sky was a canvas of soft blues and pale golds as the town of Eldridge slowly stirred awake. Shops opened, blinds rolled up, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the bakery next door to the diner. Grace was behind the counter, just like every morning, apron tied, hair pulled back, hands moving by memory, pouring coffee, setting plates, offering quiet smiles. But her thoughts were elsewhere. Luke had not been by in 3 days. She knew he had been called back to the nearby airbase for training, something to do with a joint exercise. He had left her a note. "Back soon. Save me a booth." But that soon was starting to stretch into worry. Just as she reached for the sugar jar, the sound came. Not the morning hum of traffic, not the laughter of early risers, a roar, low, thunderous, powerful. It shook the diner's windows, silverware rattled on tabletops. Customers looked up, confused, curious. Grace froze. Then came the shadow. Dark and sharp, it sliced across the main street, a jet soaring low, sleek and fast, unmistakable in shape. F-22 Raptor. Gasps echoed around her. Someone shouted from outside, "It's circling back!" Grace ran to the door, heart pounding, apron fluttering behind her. People had spilled onto the sidewalks, faces turned toward the sky, eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. The jet came around again, glinting in the sunlight, majestic and surreal. It began to climb, slower this time, before releasing a trail of white smoke from its tail. A message began to form across the sky, bold, visible to the entire town. "Thank you, Grace!" The crowd erupted in stunned applause and awed laughter. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filled instantly, lips trembling. She had never seen anything like it, not in movies, not in dreams. Her name, written across the sky by a machine of war, now transformed into a messenger of something heartbreakingly tender. But deep down, her joy warred with something else. Was this goodbye? The jet disappeared behind the clouds, leaving silence in its wake and a single name still lingering in the sky. She turned back toward the diner, blinking back tears, her chest tight. Maybe that was his way of letting go, of saying what he could not say face to face. Maybe that was the end. Then the bell above the door chimed. The diner had not yet recovered from the spectacle outside, but now all attention turned inward again. Grace turned. He was there. Luke, in full flight suit, hair tousled, boots coated with dust from the field behind town. The door swung closed behind him as he walked in, calm, steady, eyes locked on hers. The diner went still. Then someone clapped, and another. Soon the entire room filled with applause. Luke didn't look at anyone else. He walked straight toward Grace, through the aisle, past every stunned onlooker, until he stood in front of her, just inches away. Her hands trembled. "I thought," she began, voice cracking. He shook his head gently, cutting her off. "This isn't goodbye," he said softly. "This is me coming home." Her breath caught. The room disappeared. She stepped forward, into him, into the smell of jet fuel and rain and something deeply familiar. He didn't kiss her. He didn't have to. His forehead touched hers, and in the hush between two heartbeats, she knew. He had flown across skies, through storms, past grief and memory and fear, not to leave, but to return. The sign above the front door was simple, hand-painted in muted navy blue with white lettering, "The Runway Cafe." Beneath it, in smaller font, was the tagline that meant everything to the two people who built it: "Where warriors rest, and coffee is always hot." The building had once been a tired mechanic's garage, rusted and abandoned at the edge of town. For years it sat empty, its broken windows boarded, its concrete floor stained with old oil and time. But where others saw ruin, Grace and Luke saw possibility. They saw a place not just to serve coffee, but to serve healing. Now it glowed with warm amber lights strung across the ceiling like low-hanging stars. The scent of espresso beans and cinnamon rolls wrapped around everyone who walked through the door like a welcome-home hug. Wooden floors creaked underfoot in comforting ways, and mismatched tables, lovingly sanded and stained by Luke himself, gave the space a heartbeat. Every corner was intentional. Every inch carried a purpose. One half of the space was the cafe, cozy, inviting, filled with secondhand books, chalkboard menus, and walls covered in photos and sketches donated by veterans who found peace here. There were no uniforms, no ranks, just first names and favorite drinks. The other half, a soft sanctuary. A quiet room lined with armchairs worn in all the right places, shelves of art supplies, a worn guitar, weighted blankets, and no pressure. It wasn't labeled a therapy room, but that was what it became. A place for those who had seen too much to simply sit without being asked to explain. Every morning, Grace stood behind the counter in her signature navy apron, pouring coffee with the same grace she once used to pour hope into the hands of a trembling soldier. But this time, it was hers. The cafe, the mission, the love. The quiet was no longer something she endured, it was something she curated. And Luke belonged there now too, not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as something softer, something solid, something home. 3 months earlier, he'd turned in his wings. He didn't do it out of protest or regret, he did it because something had shifted. He didn't want to fly toward noise anymore, he wanted stillness, a future with 2 feet on the ground. He had spent years mastering the sky, now he wanted to master connection, healing, the art of staying. Each day Luke greeted every veteran who walked through the door. Some came with smiles, others with scars. Some spoke, some could not. He didn't push. He offered his presence like a bridge, silent, steady, patient. Sometimes all they needed was someone who wouldn't flinch when the silence stretched. He kept a sketch pad behind the bar, just like he used to use. Now, he offered it to others. Sometimes drawing did what words couldn't. Next to the register there was a shadow box mounted on the wall, filled with worn dog tags, each one left behind by someone who had found a little more peace than when they first walked in. It wasn't a wall of memory, it was a wall of permission. Permission to let go, to move forward, to be seen. Every Thursday night the cafe held an event called Night Watch. The name came from an old military tradition, standing guard while others slept. Only here it meant something different. It meant you are not alone. It meant someone is watching with you. Veterans sat together at one long table. Some talked, some just ate. Grace cooked her famous chili. Luke manned the record player, spinning vinyl blues while the room filled with stories that never made it into history books. One Thursday, after the last dish had been cleared and the last chair pushed in, Grace and Luke stepped outside into the cool night. String lights swayed above the patio. The stars blinked overhead. A slice of pecan pie sat between them on a shared plate. Grace looked at him, her voice softer than the night air. "Why me?" she asked. Luke tilted his head, thoughtful. "You could have had anyone," she said. "You could have walked away, stayed in the sky, left the mess behind." He set his fork down and leaned back, eyes tracing the lights above them. "I didn't want just anyone," he said, "and the mess wasn't something I wanted to leave. It was something I wanted to clean up, with someone who saw it and didn't run." He turned to her then, meeting her gaze full on. "You were the first place I didn't want to fly away from." The words landed softly but deeply. They rooted themselves in her chest. "You didn't try to fix me," he said. "You didn't ask for anything. You stayed. You saw me when I couldn't see myself." Grace blinked back the tears she hadn't expected. "And I realized," he added, reaching for her hand, "a heart like yours doesn't happen twice." She slid her fingers into his, lacing them together. The cafe behind them was quiet, the stars above steady, and the hum in her chest wasn't fear. It was belonging. He wasn't running anymore. She wasn't waiting anymore. They weren't broken. They weren't lost. They weren't looking for rescue. They had found it, in each other. Not a cure, but a home. The Runway Cafe had become more than just a place for coffee. It had become a lighthouse. Veterans, drifters, and those walking the fragile line between silence and survival found their way there, not because it promised to fix them, but because it made space for them to breathe. In one corner of the cafe every Saturday morning, Luke ran a small drawing circle. He called it Quiet Hands. It was open to children of veterans, many of whom carried invisible grief. He taught them how to sketch emotion, not just faces, how to turn feeling into lines, fear into shading, love into color. They adored him. They copied his steady movements, his rare smiles, and the way he never rushed anyone. One child, Eli, aged 10, once gave him a crayon drawing of a fighter jet landing on a big red heart. Luke framed it and hung it behind the register. Meanwhile, Grace had found her own rhythm. She began writing, late at night, after closing, just for herself at first. Small reflections, fragments of moments, what it felt like to hold someone's hand when they were trembling, what it meant to serve coffee to a man who had seen too much and said too little. She didn't expect anyone to read them, but they did. Her blog, titled The Landing Strip, caught attention fast. Her words weren't polished, but they were true. She told stories of second chances, of men who found peace pouring milk into their coffee instead of holding a rifle. She never used names, but everyone knew who the quiet soldier in the sketches was. Soon their story reached farther than Eldridge. A local news station picked it up. Then a regional network. Then a military podcast. Within months, Grace and Luke were being called the soft soldiers, a couple who never defined their love with a label, but with presence, with eye contact, with silent loyalty. When asked about their relationship, Grace always smiled and said, "He's not my boyfriend, he's my landing zone." Luke would nod and reply, "She's the only place I ever stopped running toward." They never kissed for the cameras, never posed in uniform. But they were known and deeply respected. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The cafe was quiet. Only a few regulars sat nursing their mugs. Luke was restocking sketch pads when the door creaked open. A boy, barely 20, stepped inside, drenched, eyes hollow, jaw tight with tension. His clothes were military issue. His hands trembled. He stood just inside the doorway, unmoving. Luke noticed instantly. He didn't speak. He didn't call for Grace. He walked over slowly, calmly. When he reached the boy, he didn't offer coffee. He knelt. Not out of obligation, but instinct. He looked up at the young man, just a kid really, and reached out his hand. "You don't have to talk," Luke said gently. "You don't have to explain." The boy blinked, swallowing hard. Luke's voice lowered, his words slow and even. "Someone stayed for me." He opened his palm. "Let me stay for you." The boy stared at the hand, frozen for a moment that felt like a lifetime. Then finally he took it. Grace watched from the counter, tears in her eyes, her heart full. Not because Luke had saved someone, but because this time he had chosen to stay. The roar of the F-22 had long faded into the horizon, leaving behind only the echo of awe in the air and the soft crunch of grass beneath their feet. Grace stood motionless in the field behind the diner, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hands still trembling as Luke knelt before her, holding out the ring like it was more than a promise, like it was the end of a long, long flight. And it was. Because for both of them, this wasn't just a proposal. It was a landing, a safe arrival after storms neither of them had ever put into words. She nodded through the tears, her voice cracked and barely audible. "Yes." The crowd surrounding them erupted into applause. Customers, neighbors, veterans, staff. They clapped, some wiping their own eyes, others grinning wide like they had known all along this would be the ending. Luke stood, slipping the ring onto her finger with hands that once gripped a flight stick through combat zones. Now they trembled for a softer reason. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest, and for a moment everything, the jet, the crowd, the world, disappeared. Then came a tug at her apron. Grace turned to see Liam, 12 years old, shy, quiet, always watching from the corner of the cafe. The son of a veteran who had passed, and the first child to ever walk into the Runway Cafe's therapy room and sit without saying a word for 3 weeks straight. Liam now held up a folded piece of paper, edges wrinkled, smudged with pencil and fingerprints. She took it gently and unfolded it. The drawing was simple, powerful, a fighter jet descending from a blue sky, landing not on a runway, but on a giant red heart. Above it, blocky letters in a child's hand, "You're where the sky goes to rest." Her eyes filled again. She crouched to hug him, and Liam, who rarely touched anyone, leaned into it without hesitation. Later that day, after the field had cleared and the sunlight shifted golden across the horizon, Luke and Grace stood hand in hand beneath the new sign above their cafe door. It had been painted while they were in the field, a surprise gift from the local veterans group. The wood was oak, sturdy and worn, the lettering carved deep, proud and clear. "Where fighter jets land and hearts finally rest." Below it, someone, probably one of the kids, had added in smaller writing, "And where no one flies alone." Grace leaned her head on Luke's shoulder. He kissed the top of her hair. The sky above was clear, impossibly blue. No clouds, no noise. But they both knew that the clearest skies often came after the heaviest storms. And as the sun dipped low, lighting the windows of the Runway Cafe in soft gold, laughter and warmth spilled out from within. Soldiers, children, families, the broken, the healing, the quiet ones who once believed they had no place to land. Now, they did. Because sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is stop running and let love be the place they finally call home. Sometimes the most powerful love stories are not built in palaces or written in letters, but found in the quiet corners of a diner, in a trembling hand held, in a jet streaking across the sky, not for war, but for love. Grace didn't rescue a soldier, she stayed for a soul. Luke didn't fly for glory, he landed for a home. Together, they turned trauma into tenderness, and a cafe into a sanctuary. Because in a world where some hearts are trained to fight, it only takes one act of kindness to remind them they are allowed to rest, to love, and to begin again. If this story stirred something in you, hope, tears, belief in second chances, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that healing is possible. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you true and timeless tales of love, resilience, and the human spirit. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay brave, and stay with us.